My name is Dulce Whitford. I'm 28 years old. For 2 decades, my parents labeled me the slow one while my sister Miranda stacked Harvard credentials and promises of inheritance. They laughed at my dyslexia over dinner, shut me out of family decisions, and paid me pennies compared to her. But at Miranda's graduation celebration at the Plaza Hotel, with 350 guests watching, a stranger placed an envelope in my hands that would unravel every lie my parents had told about me. They had no idea Grandma had been watching. She saw it all. And she left behind something powerful enough to turn the entire Whitford empire on its head. The Whitfords were Manhattan old money, the kind of surname engraved on hospital wings and etched into museum plaques. My father, Gerald Whitford, ran Whitford Properties, a commercial real estate powerhouse my grandmother, Eleanor, had started from a single Brooklyn office back in 1965. By 2024, it was valued at $92 million. I was diagnosed with dyslexia at 7. Words on a page wouldn't stay still. Letters shifted and blurred, turning simple sentences into riddles that took me 3 times longer to decode than anyone else. My parents didn't respond with help. They responded with embarrassment. When I was 12, they hired tutors for Miranda, violin at Juilliard, French immersion programs, SAT coaching from a Princeton graduate who billed $400 an hour. When I asked if I could get support for reading, my mother, Priscilla, exhaled sharply. Dulce, we've already invested so much in specialists. At some point, we have to accept that not every child is academic. I was 12. I believed her. So I figured things out alone. Audiobooks became my anchor. I created visual systems, diagrams, charts, color-coded maps, to understand information in ways traditional reading never allowed. And every Sunday afternoon, I rode the train to my grandmother Eleanor's apartment on the Upper West Side. She would sit with me for hours, explaining ideas through stories instead of textbooks. "Dooley," she once said, her weather hand resting over mine, "you may read slower, but you notice what others overlook. That's not a weakness. That's a different kind of sight." I didn't grasp her meaning then. I would eventually. But first, I had to endure 19 more years as the Whitford family's quiet embarrassment. Christmas 2018. 20 relatives gathered around the polished mahogany table in my parents' Upper East Side townhouse. Crystal chandeliers.
Caté de course.
The annual performance of Whitford perfection. My father rose, lifting his wine glass. "I have an announcement," he said, his voice carrying the authority he wore like a tailored suit. "Miranda has been accepted to Harvard Law School. Full scholarship." Applause erupted. Cheers filled the room. Miranda lowered her gaze with rehearsed humility. "My eldest daughter," Gerald continued proudly, "will be the first Whitford in 3 generations to attend Harvard. She's going to elevate this family and this company to unprecedented heights." More applause. Uncle Richard thumped Miranda's back. Aunt Catherine dabbed her eyes. Then my father's attention drifted down the table. "And Dooley," he paused. The warmth drained from his voice.
"Well,
"Dooley is also here." Soft, uneasy laughter circled the table. The kind people offer when discomfort needs an outlet. Miranda didn't defend me. She laughed too. I stared at my plate, the roasted lamb blurring behind the tears I refused to shed. Under the table, a frail hand slipped into mine. Thin fingers. Papery skin. Grandma Eleanor, seated across from me, squeezed gently. When I met her eyes, there was something fierce there, almost rage, aimed at her own son. She said nothing that night, but 3 months later, she called me to her apartment, told me she had something important to show me. I didn't realize then that that Christmas dinner, that moment of casual humiliation before 20 witnesses, had set something into motion, something that would take 5 years to explode. After graduating from a state university in 2022, not Ivy League, never Ivy League, I applied for a job at Whitford Properties. I wanted to prove I could contribute, that the family business had room for me too. My father agreed to hire me as an administrative assistant. Salary, $42,000. That same month, Miranda joined as chief legal counsel.
Salary, $280,000 plus bonus.
I made copies, reserved conference rooms, and brought coffee to executives who never bothered to learn my name. I wasn't invited into meetings. I never reviewed a contract. But I watched. And I listened. During those long hours in the copy room, I discovered something. I could detect patterns others missed. When executives discussed deals in the hallway, I'd sketch relationship maps, tracking parties, money flow, potential conflicts. The coping skills I'd built for dyslexia had evolved into something sharper. Grandma Eleanor had trained me for this. On Sunday afternoons, she would spread old company contracts across her coffee table and teach me to see them not word by word, but as structures, systems. Your father reads contracts like a lawyer, she told me in 2019, just before her health began to fail. He searches for angles to exploit. You read them like a builder. You see how everything connects. That same day, she handed me a small mahogany box with brass hinges. Keep this safe, she said. Don't open it yet. When you need it, you'll know. I brought it home, slid it into my closet, and tried to ignore the weight of her words. March 2019. Grandma Eleanor was 82. Thinner, her silver hair wispy against her armchair pillow. But her eyes were as sharp as ever.
Sit, Dooley.
I took my usual place in her living room. The walls were lined with photographs. Eleanor breaking ground on her first Brooklyn property in 1965. Eleanor shaking hands with Mayor Koch. Eleanor receiving a Women in Business Award in 1987. Not one image of my father leading. I built Whitford Properties from nothing, she said steadily. One office. One secretary. 60 years of work. Your father, she paused, bitterness flashing across her face. Your father inherited it. He didn't create it. He doesn't understand what building something truly means. She leaned closer. He measures people by degrees, credentials, how well they perform in boardrooms. I measure people by how they treat those who can't defend themselves. And you, Dulce, are the only one in this family who knows how to be kind. She pressed the wooden box into my hands. There's something inside that may help you one day. But not yet. You're not ready. And neither is Gerald. Her grip tightened. When the moment comes, when he shows you exactly who he is, you'll know what to do. I wanted to ask what she meant. What was inside? Why me? Instead, she shifted to small talk, the weather, her garden, a novel she was reading. 18 months later, she was gone. Pancreatic cancer. I held her hand in hospice. I was the only family member there. The box stayed unopened in my closet. April 2024. The email arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Subject: Position restructuring, confidential. As part of ongoing organizational optimization, your position will be eliminated effective July 1st, 2024. HR will contact you regarding severance. I read it 3 times. The letters blurred and settled back into the same message. They were firing me. That evening, I stayed late organizing files no one would miss. Through the thin wall between my cubicle and my father's corner office, I heard voices. Gerald and Priscilla. We can't have her here once Miranda takes over, my father said. It looks bad. The CEO's sister working as a secretary. People will talk. What will they ask? My mother replied. Why she isn't in leadership. Why we never promoted her. A pause. Why she's the way she is. My mother's voice softened. We did everything we could for her, Gerald. Some children just don't have it.
Exactly.
So she needs to go. We'll give her a generous severance. She can find something better suited to her abilities. I press my palm against the wall. $42,000 a year. My studio apartment in Queens, shared with 2 roommates, cost $1,800 a month.
No savings.
No safety net. Without this job, I'd be homeless in 2 months. But the money wasn't what hollowed me out. It was the realization that if I accepted this, if I accepted their definition of me, I would remain the family failure forever. Not because I lacked ability, but because I'd never been allowed to prove it. Miranda's graduation celebration was the next day. I wondered what else my father had prepared. May 15th, 2024. The Plaza Hotel. Grand Ballroom. 350 guests filled the gilded room: investors, business partners, white shoe attorneys, distant relatives. Crystal chandeliers scattered prismatic light across silk-draped tables. A 12-piece orchestra played Gershwin. This was Gerald Whitford's stage. I stood near the entrance, adjusting the hem of my black dress. Simple, $79 from Zara. The most I could manage. Around me, designer gowns shimmered and tuxedos gleamed. My mother intercepted me. Dulce. Her eyes scanned my drugstore makeup and worn heels. You couldn't find something better? This is what I have. She adjusted her Cartier bracelet. You'll be at table 27, near the service entrance. Try not to attract attention. Of course. She leaned closer, Chanel number 5 overwhelming. Tonight is Miranda's night. Whatever bitterness you're carrying, keep it hidden. Don't embarrass us. She walked away before I could respond. Table 27 was tucked behind a pillar at the back of the ballroom. My tablemates were distant cousins I barely knew. From there, I could see the stage, a towering portrait of Miranda in Harvard regalia behind a banner. Congratulations, Miranda Whitford, Harvard Law Class of 2024. Near the entrance stood a silver-haired man in a gray suit. He wasn't socializing. He wasn't eating. He was watching. His gaze met mine. A chill slid down my spine. At 8:30 p.m., the orchestra fell silent. The lights dimmed. A spotlight found my father. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, lifting his champagne flute. Thank you for joining us to celebrate an extraordinary young woman. Applause erupted. Miranda graduated in the top 5% of her Harvard Law class. She clerked for Justice Reynolds. And last month, she made partner track at Sullivan and Cromwell in record time. His voice swelled with pride. But tonight isn't just about her accomplishments. It's about her future. Miranda joined him on stage, radiant in emerald Valentino. Effective immediately, my father announced, Miranda Whitford will inherit my entire estate upon my passing. This includes our family residence at 740 Park Avenue, valued at $13 million, a Tesla Model S Plaid, and, most importantly, he paused for effect, the role of CEO of Whitford Properties when I retire. The ballroom exploded into a standing ovation. Camera flashes lit the room. Miranda dabbed her eyes gracefully. 350 people celebrating. Not one of them looked toward table 27. The cousin beside me leaned over. Dooley, right? So, what happens to you? I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. What could I say? That I had just been erased from my own family? That a termination letter waited in my inbox? That every fear I'd carried about being worthless had just been validated publicly? As applause faded, Miranda embraced our father. Cameras clicked. Through the crowd, the silver-haired man began walking toward me. Slow, deliberate, as if he'd been waiting for this precise moment. He stopped at my table. Up close, he looked older than I'd thought, early 60s. Deep-set eyes. The composed posture of someone accustomed to courtrooms. Miss Whitford. That's me. I straightened. Can I help you? My name is Jonathan Ellis. He handed me a cream-colored card embossed with Morrison and Blake, attorneys at law. I represented your grandmother. My chest tightened. My grandmother passed away 3 years ago.
I'm aware.
His tone remained steady. She left something for you, with strict instructions regarding when it was to be delivered. From inside his jacket, he removed a heavy cream envelope sealed with red wax and a notary stamp. What is this? Her will. The real one. His voice lowered. The one your father doesn't know about. The seal read Morrison and Blake. September 12th, 2019. 5 months after that Sunday in her apartment. 5 months after she gave me the wooden box. I don't understand. Your grandmother instructed me to deliver this document on the day your father publicly disinherited you. He glanced toward the stage. I believe that moment has arrived. My hands trembled as I accepted it. What's inside? For the first time, warmth flickered in his eyes. Mrs. Eleanor told me to say, give this to Dulce on the day Gerald shows her exactly who he is. By then, she'll be ready. He adjusted his tie. I'm available if you have questions. You have my card. Then he disappeared into the crowd. I couldn't breathe inside that ballroom. I slipped through the service entrance into an empty hallway near the kitchen. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The celebration became a distant murmur. My fingers shook as I broke the wax seal. 3 pages of dense legal language.
À notaris de signature.
September 12th, 2019. I forced myself to read slowly. Eleanor Margaret Whitford, being of sound mind, hereby revoke all prior testamentary documents and declare this to be my last will and testament. Midway down the page, my eyes locked on a paragraph. To my granddaughter, Dulce and Whitford, I leave 51% of my shares in Whitford Properties LLC, currently valued at approximately $47 million, including all associated voting rights. I read it again. 51%. Controlling interest. The will continued. This bequest is made with full awareness of my son Gerald's treatment of Dulce. She has been excluded, diminished, and denied opportunity not because she lacks ability, but because she lacked support. Dooley is not slow. Dooley was abandoned. I refused to allow her father's prejudice to extend beyond my lifetime. A sob rose in my throat. Grandma had seen. She had seen everything. Then the condition. To activate this bequest, Dulce must formally request an emergency board meeting within 72 hours of receiving this document. Failure to do so will render this will void, and all assets will transfer according to my 2015 testament. 72 hours. The deadline. 8:30 p.m. May 18th. I leaned against the cold wall, clutching the pages to my chest. My grandmother had handed me a weapon. Now I had to decide whether I was brave enough to use it. Jonathan Ellis stood by the coat check when I returned. You read it. The 72-hour clause. My voice shook. Why would she do that? Your grandmother understood you, he said, offering a second card, his personal number handwritten on the back. She knew that if you had unlimited time, you might talk yourself out of acting. He held my gaze. The deadline isn't a threat. It's permission. Permission to stop waiting for your father's approval. Family would suddenly start believing in you. To stop waiting for them to change their minds about who you are and claim what is rightfully yours. He glanced down at his watch. Your deadline is 8:30 p.m. on May 18th. 3 days. If you choose to move forward, you'll need to submit a formal request for an emergency board meeting. I can assist you in preparing it. Through the ballroom doors, I could still see my father standing on stage with Miranda, smiling for photographs. My mother floated between guests, accepting congratulations as if she had personally earned them. If I did this, if I activated the will, it would shatter what little family relationship I had left. My parents would never forgive me. Miranda would treat it like betrayal. But if I stayed quiet, I would be accepting their judgment. I would become exactly what they had always called me. The failure, the slow one. The daughter who didn't matter. Miss Whitford. Alice's voice interrupted the spiral in my head. Your grandmother believed in you. She spent the final years of her life preparing for this moment. He held my gaze. The only question now is whether you believe in yourself. I looked down at the will in my hands, at the elegant signature of the woman who had squeezed my hand under Christmas tables and taught me to read contracts like they were blueprints. I'll call you tomorrow, I said quietly. We're requesting that board meeting. Ellis allowed himself a faint smile. She said you would. I'm going to pause here for just a moment. If you've ever been underestimated by the very people who are supposed to believe in you, if you know what it feels like to be dismissed, comment the word enough below. I want to know I'm not the only one. And if you want to see what happened when I walked into that boardroom, keep watching because we're just getting started. Now, back to the story. That night, in my cramped Queens apartment, I finally opened the wooden box. My roommates were asleep. The only light came from a street lamp outside my window, throwing orange stripes across the bed where I sat cross-legged, the mahogany box resting in my lap. The brass hinges creaked softly as I lifted the lid. Inside were 3 items: A handwritten letter on Eleanor's personal stationery, a faded document stamped with a 1965 date, and a sleek USB drive that had clearly been added years later. I picked up the letter first. My dearest Dulce, if you're reading this, then Jonathan has delivered the will, and your father has done exactly what I feared he would. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you while I was alive, but I can protect you now. The document enclosed is the original partnership agreement from 1965, when I founded Whitford Properties with two partners who have long since passed away. Your father has never seen it. It establishes that the founders' shares carry permanent voting rights that cannot be diluted or transferred without board approval. The USB contains something else, something your father hoped I had forgotten. In 2018, Gerald proposed a resolution to reduce my voting rights from 51% to 10%. His official explanation was that I was too old to understand modern business. The real reason was simple. He wanted control, and I was in his way. The board rejected his proposal by 2 votes. I was one of them. I never forgot what he tried to do. And I never forgave the way he treated you to justify it, as if diminishing you somehow proved I was unfit. Use this wisely, Dulce. Not for revenge, for justice. All my love. Grandma Eleanor. I plugged the USB drive into my laptop. The file was labeled, Board Meeting Minutes, March 2018. A PDF. Timestamped. My father's attempt to strip his own mother of power, preserved in official record. May 16th, 9:01 a.m. Margaret Coleman answered on the second ring. Duly Whitford. Her voice had the rough warmth of someone who had smoked for decades and laughed even longer. I've been wondering when you'd call. You know who I am? Sweetheart, your grandmother and I built half of Brooklyn in the 70s. She talked about you all the time. A brief pause. She also told me about the will 3 years ago, right before she died. I tightened my grip on the phone. Then you know what I'm about to do. I know what you're considering, Margaret said. That's not quite the same thing. Her tone shifted, more businesslike now. You want to request an emergency board meeting. That requires signatures from 3 board members. I'm one. You'll need 2 more. Can you help me find them? I can do better than that. I heard papers shuffling on her end. Gerald Whitford isn't as popular as he likes to think. His leadership style is, let's call it autocratic. At least 4 directors have complained privately. They just need someone brave enough to go first. Hope sparked in my chest. Who? Richard Holloway. Susan Parker. Both have had run-ins with Gerald behind closed doors. I'll make some calls. She paused. Dooley, you should understand something. This won't be pleasant. Your father will fight. Your sister will fight. They'll say awful things. They've been saying awful things my entire life, I replied. At least now I get to answer. Margaret laughed, warm and genuine. Eleanor always said you had steel under all that quiet. I'm starting to see it. She cleared her throat. I'll have the petition ready tonight. Board meeting request, May 18th, 10 a.m. Whitford Tower, 42nd floor. Thank you, Margaret. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you're sitting in that boardroom. May 17th. Gerald discovered the board meeting request at exactly 4 p.m. I know because Miranda called me 45 minutes later, her voice tight with controlled fury. What did you do? I was sitting in my cubicle pretending to organize files. I don't know what you're talking about. Dad just got a notice from the board secretary. Emergency meeting tomorrow, requested by Margaret Coleman and 2 other directors. A pause sharp enough to cut glass. Margaret Coleman hasn't called a meeting in 15 years. What did you do? Maybe she has concerns about company management. Don't play games with me, Dooley. Miranda's composure cracked. If you're trying to embarrass us, trying to cause some kind of scene, I'm just doing my job, Miranda. Same as always. She hung up. 20 minutes later, Gerald stormed past my cubicle on his way to his office. He didn't even glance at me. His door slammed hard enough to shake the windows. Through the wall, I heard him on the phone. Ridiculous waste of time. Margaret's probably going senile. We'll address her concerns and move on. A pause. No, I'm not worried. Dooley? My God, Miranda. She can barely read a spreadsheet. She's not a threat to anyone. I smiled. For the first time in 28 years, being underestimated felt like an advantage. That night, back in my apartment, I prepared. I printed 3 copies of the will. I downloaded the 2018 board minutes onto my phone as backup. I wrote a short statement, not an accusation, just facts. Jonathan Ellis confirmed he would attend as the authenticating attorney. Margaret texted me at 11 p.m. Petition filed. See you tomorrow. Your grandmother would be proud. I barely slept. But for once, it wasn't anxiety keeping me awake. It was anticipation. May 18th, 2024. 9:45 a.m. Whitford Tower. The elevator doors opened onto the 42nd floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Italian marble floors. Corporate luxury, designed to intimidate. I stepped out wearing a borrowed gray blazer, my roommate's, 2 sizes too big, carrying a leather portfolio I had bought at Goodwill for $12. The security guard outside the boardroom raised his hand. Name? Dooley Whitford. He checked his tablet, frowning. You're not on the authorized attendee list. I'm an employee of Whitford Properties, and I have business with the board. Ma'am, this is a restricted meeting. I can't let you. Is there a problem? Miranda's voice behind me. I turned. She looked flawless. Navy power suit, Hermes scarf, the uniform of someone who belonged in rooms like this. Dooley, she said, smiling without warmth. What are you doing here? I have information to present to the board. Information. Miranda laughed sharply. About what? You work in the copy room. The nature of my presentation is confidential. You don't even know what ROI stands for. Return on investment, I replied calmly. It's not that complicated. Her smile faltered. Before she could respond, our father appeared at the end of the hallway with 2 executives beside him. What's going on here? Dulce wants to attend the board meeting, Miranda said smoothly. I was explaining that isn't possible. Gerald looked at me the way he always had, like I was a stain he couldn't quite remove. Dooley, go back to your desk. This doesn't concern you. Actually, a voice called from inside the boardroom. It does. Margaret Coleman stepped into the doorway. 72 years old, silver hair, standing with the quiet authority of someone who had been building empires when Gerald was still a child. I invited her, Margaret said calmly. She is standing to address the board. She smiled slightly. Let her in. Gerald's jaw tightened. For a moment, I thought he might block the doorway. But Margaret Coleman had served on the board for 32 years. Her authority in that room outweighed his. Fine, my father said coldly. Let her speak. We'll see how long it takes before she embarrasses herself. The boardroom was smaller than I expected. An oval walnut table, 12 leather chairs, portraits of past executives lining the walls, including my grandmother Eleanor, her painted eyes watching from above the fireplace. 12 directors took their seats. Gerald at the head. Miranda beside him, not officially a board member yet, but positioned like the heir. I was given a chair at the far end, the corporate equivalent of the children's table. In the corner sat Jonathan Ellis with his briefcase. He caught my eye and nodded once. Robert Hartley, the board chairman, called the meeting to order. This emergency session was requested by Margaret Coleman, Richard Holloway, and Susan Parker. Margaret, you have the floor. Margaret stood. Thank you, Robert. I'll be brief. She gestured toward me. The matter I want to address concerns a document that recently surfaced, one that affects the ownership structure of this company. She paused. I yield my time to Miss Dooley Whitford. All eyes turned toward me. Miranda smirked. Gerald leaned back in his chair with exaggerated boredom. I stood. My hands were steadier than I expected. Thank you, Mrs. Coleman. And thank you to the board for allowing me to speak. I opened my portfolio. What I'm about to present may surprise some of you. I ask only that you review the evidence before forming conclusions. Gerald sighed loudly. I ignored him. Before I could continue, he raised his hand. I'm sorry, Robert, but before we waste the board's valuable time. Gerald stood slowly, buttoning his jacket. I think some context is necessary. Gerald, Margaret began. Dulce is my daughter, he said smoothly. And I love her. But she is not qualified to address this board on any business matter. He gestured toward me dismissively. She works in an administrative role. She has no legal training, no financial background, no strategic experience. Miranda added softly, dripping with sympathy. Julie also has dyslexia. Reading is difficult for her. We've tried to help, but she shrugged elegantly. Some limitations simply can't be overcome. A few board members shifted in their chairs. What we're witnessing, Gerald continued, is a troubled young woman acting out, perhaps because of the announcement at Miranda's graduation party. Sibling jealousy can be difficult. Mr. Whitford. Robert Hartley's voice cracked across the room like a gavel. You'll have an opportunity to respond. But Miss Whitford requested this time, and she will have it. Gerald sat down slowly, his expression promising consequences. Miranda caught my eye and mouthed, "You're embarrassing yourself." I looked at both of them, my father and my sister, and felt something shift inside me. Not anger. Something colder. Clearer. They weren't protecting me. They weren't protecting the company. They were protecting their version of the story, the one where I was nothing. Thank you, Mr. Hartley. I pulled a document from my portfolio. I won't be discussing my reading ability today. I raised the paper so everyone could see it. I'll be discussing this. The room went silent. This is the last will and testament of Eleanor Margaret Whitford, founder of this company, notarized September 12th, 2019. Gerald's face drained of color. That's impossible. His voice came out strained. My mother's will was executed in 2015. I have a copy. You have a copy of her previous will, I said calmly. Under New York estates law, a later valid will automatically revokes earlier ones. I placed the document on the table. This one was executed 4 years later. I slid it toward Robert Hartley. Mr. Ellis, I said, gesturing toward Jonathan, could you confirm the authenticity of this document? Jonathan stood. I'm Jonathan Ellis, partner at Morrison & Blake. I served as Eleanor Whitford's attorney from 2008 until her death in 2021. I can confirm this will was executed in my presence on September 12, 2019, witnessed by 2 independent notaries. The original is held in escrow at Chase Private Client. Robert Hartley studied the document. His eyebrows rose. This will bequeaths 51% of Whitford Properties shares to, he looked up at me. To you, Miss Whitford. Murmurs spread around the table. That's a forgery, Miranda said, though her voice had lost its certainty. It isn't, Jonathan replied immediately. And I would advise against making accusations of fraud without evidence. Gerald slammed his hand on the table. This is absurd. My mother was ill. She was being manipulated. Manipulated? I pulled out my phone. Perhaps you can explain this then. I pressed play. My father's voice filled the boardroom. Eleanor is 81 years old. She doesn't understand modern business. I moved to reduce her voting rights to 10%. The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute. That recording, Gerald sputtered. That was a private board discussion, which Eleanor attended. I replied calmly. She recorded it as a shareholder. Robert Hartley removed his glasses slowly. Miss Whitford, would you read the relevant passage from the will for the record? I nodded and took a breath. To my granddaughter, Dulce and Whitford, I bequeath 51% of my shares in Whitford Properties LLC, along with all associated voting rights. I paused, letting the words settle. This bequest is made with full knowledge of my son Gerald's treatment of Dooley. She has been excluded, diminished, and denied opportunity not because she lacks ability, but because she lacked support. Miranda made a strangled sound. Dooley is not slow. Dooley was abandoned. And I will not allow her father's prejudice to continue after my death. I looked directly at Gerald. Gerald has confused credentials with character, degrees with worth. He attempted to strip me of my voting rights because I saw through him. He marginalized Dulce because she reminded him of the kind of person he refuses to be. Gerald said nothing, but his hands were shaking. The will concludes, I continued. I built this company from nothing. I choose who carries it forward. I choose duly. Robert Hartley turned to Jonathan. You can confirm this document is legally binding? I can. Then the 2015 will is superseded. Jonathan nodded. As of this moment, Dulce Whitford is the majority shareholder of Whitford Properties. Margaret Coleman smiled quietly. Richard Holloway and Susan Parker exchanged glances. And for the first time in my life, my father looked at me with something other than dismissal. He looked afraid. This proves nothing, Miranda said sharply, though her voice had become brittle. Even if the will is valid, which we will contest, Dooley has no business experience. She can't run a company. I'm not asking to run the company, I said. I address the entire board. I'm asking you to examine the facts. I pulled out another document. March 14th, 2018. Gerald Whitford proposed Resolution 2018 to 2007 to reduce Eleanor Whitford's voting shares from 51% to 10%. That's taken out of context, Gerald snapped. The resolution failed by 2 votes. I continued calmly. Eleanor Whitford and Margaret Coleman. I looked toward Margaret. Is that accurate? Margaret nodded slowly. It is. Eleanor called me that night. She was devastated, not because the resolution failed. She knew it would, but because her own son had tried to take everything she'd built. Built, Gerald cut in sharply. That's ancient history. It's evidence, I interrupted. Evidence that my grandmother was fully capable when she drafted the 2019 will. She wasn't confused. She wasn't manipulated. She was safeguarding herself from her own son, and she was safeguarding me. Robert Hartley scanned the table. Does anyone have documentation that contradicts what's been presented? Silence. Gerald. My father's jaw clenched. No response. Miranda? She stared down at the polished wood. The flawless composure she'd worn all her life had finally fractured. Richard Holloway spoke for the first time. Robert, I suggest we recess and allow legal counsel to review these materials. Agreed, Hartley said, checking his watch. We'll reconvene in 15 minutes. Jonathan, please remain available. Chairs scraped back. Conversations broke into hushed clusters. Gerald stayed seated, unmoving, staring at my grandmother's portrait on the wall. I wondered if he felt her eyes on him. 15 minutes became 45. The board's legal counsel, a thin man named Patterson I'd never met, spent the entire time on the phone with Morrison and Blake, Chase's private client, and the New York State Court Records Office. I sat alone at the end of the table. Jonathan brought me a glass of water. Margaret squeezed my shoulder as she passed. Across the room, Gerald and Miranda argued in tight, furious whispers. Finally, Patterson returned and leaned down to murmur in Hartley's ear. Hartley's expression shifted, surprise, then something like resignation. Please take your seats. The board members filed back in. The tension felt brittle enough to snap. Our legal counsel has confirmed the following, Hartley read. The will presented by Miss Whitford is valid under New York state law. It supersedes all prior testamentary documents. Effective immediately, Dullianne Whitford holds 51% of Whitford Properties shares. Someone inhaled sharply. Additionally, Hartley continued, as majority shareholder, Miss Whitford has the authority to propose motions to this board, including those concerning executive leadership. He looked at me. Miss Whitford, do you wish to introduce any motions? I stood. My pulse thundered, but my voice remained steady. I have one. Gerald shot to his feet. Robert, this is. Sit down, Gerald, Hartley said, steel in his tone. Miss Whitford has the floor. Gerald sank back into his chair, his face drained of color. I looked around the table. 12 people who, an hour earlier, had never imagined I could alter the direction of this company. The power to end my father's career sat squarely in my hands. I thought about my grandmother, and I chose. I am not proposing the removal of Gerald Whitford as CEO. The air shifted. Miranda's head snapped up. Even Margaret looked startled. What I am proposing, I continued, is a vote of confidence. The board will determine whether Gerald Whitford retains its confidence as CEO. If the majority votes no confidence, he resigns. If the majority votes confidence, I will not interfere in operational leadership during my tenure as majority shareholder. This is ridiculous, Miranda stood. You're turning this into a spectacle, some kind of revenge fantasy. No, I said calmly, meeting her eyes. This is corporate governance. The same process that exists in every responsibly run company. The same process Grandma Eleanor wrote into our bylaws 40 years ago. I paused. If Dad has the board's confidence, he has nothing to fear. Hartley studied me for a long moment. Something close to respect flickered across his face. Is there a second to this motion? Seconded, Margaret said immediately. Then we vote. He folded his hands. All those in favor of expressing confidence in Gerald Whitford as CEO, raise your hands. For hands lifted, his loyal allies. All those expressing no confidence. 7 hands rose. Hartley counted once. Then again. The motion carries 7-4, with 1 abstention. He turned to my father. Mr. Whitford, the board has voted no confidence. Under Section 14.3 of the bylaws, you have 30 days to tender your resignation. Gerald didn't argue. He stood and looked at me, truly looked at me, perhaps for the first time in my life. I expected fury. Threats. Instead, I saw something worse. Recognition. The realization that he had underestimated me so completely it had cost him everything. He walked out without a word. I know what some of you might be thinking. Why not fire him outright? Why give him the chance to remain? Because justice isn't revenge. Because destroying someone doesn't erase what they did. And because my grandmother raised me to be fair, not cruel. If that resonates with you, like the video, subscribe, turn on notifications. This story isn't finished. Not even close. Now, here's what happened after the boardroom emptied. Gerald cornered me in the private hallway outside. Priscilla stood beside him. Someone must have called her during the recess. Her mascara streaked down tear-stained cheeks. You, Gerald said, barely restraining himself. You ungrateful, scheming. Gerald, Priscilla whispered. Not here. She just destroyed our family in front of 12 people. I didn't destroy anything, I said evenly. I told the truth. The truth? He laughed bitterly. Your grandmother was manipulated. That lawyer, Ellis. She wrote that 5 months after you tried to strip her of control because she saw exactly who you are, I replied. You didn't lose because I betrayed you. You lost because you betrayed her. Priscilla stepped forward. Dulce, sweetheart, you have to understand. We were trying to protect you. You've always struggled. We didn't want to pressure you. You didn't protect me, I said. You've erased me. 28 years of silence, condensed into words. Every Christmas dinner, every family photo, every conversation praising Miranda while pretending I wasn't there. That wasn't protection. That was abandonment. That's not fair, she whispered. You're right, I said. It wasn't. I held her gaze. I spent my entire life trying to prove I deserve this family. I'm done proving. The documents speak for themselves. Gerald grabbed my arm. This isn't over. We'll contest the will. I pulled free. You'll lose. And you know it. Grandma planned for that too. I walked toward the elevator. Dulce, wait. My mother called. I didn't. For the first time in my life, I didn't need their permission to leave. The doors closed on their faces. I leaned against the steel wall and finally exhaled. The adrenaline drained away, replaced by something unexpected. Not victory. Grief. I had just let go of 28 years of hoping they would change. Of believing that if I was patient enough, quiet enough, good enough, they would eventually see me. That hope was gone. And I had been the one to end it. By the time the elevator reached the lobby, I had wiped my tears and straightened my borrowed blazer. Jonathan Ellis waited near the security desk. He searched for the word. Extraordinary. It was necessary. Your grandmother would agree. He walked beside me toward the exit. What happens now? Now I go home. I sleep. I figure out what my life looks like without the family I thought I had. He nodded. The board will want to discuss transition plans. Your role moving forward. I know, I said, but not today. I stepped into the Manhattan sunlight. Today I just need to be Dooley Whitford. Not a shareholder. Not a victim. Not a symbol. I looked back at Whitford Tower, 42 stories of glass bearing my family's name. Tomorrow, I start building something new. May 19th, 2024. Gerald Whitford signed his resignation at 4 p.m. I wasn't present. I learned through an email from Robert Hartley. Miss Whitford, your father has tendered his resignation effective June 15th, 2024. The board has appointed me interim CEO while we conduct a search for permanent leadership. Additionally, the board would like to offer you a formal role as strategic advisor in your capacity as majority shareholder. Please advise. I read the message 3 times, then forwarded it to Jonathan. His reply came within the hour. Fair offer.
No hidden clauses.
Congratulations, Dulce. That evening, an all-staff email announced the leadership change. My phone filled with messages from colleagues who had worked beside me for 2 years without learning my name. Coffee invitations. Congratulations. I ignored most of them, but one message stopped me. Patricia Morales, an executive assistant who had worked with my grandmother since 1987. Dooley, Eleanor used to talk about you all the time. She said you saw what others missed. I never understood until today. Welcome to the boardroom. She would be so proud. I saved that one. Some validation doesn't come from family. Sometimes that's better. A week later, the story broke in the New York Business Journal. Whitford Properties shakeup. Founder's granddaughter assumes control after previously unknown will surfaces. Corporate privacy laws kept my name out of print, but in Manhattan real estate circles, everyone knew. Investment partners requested meetings with me. 2 confirmed they would continue working with the company after speaking directly to me. We've had concerns about Gerald's leadership for years, one admitted. Your grandmother built something meaningful. It's good to see her vision protected. The social consequences rippled outward. Gala invitations disappeared. Friends of my parents suddenly had scheduling conflicts. The Whitford name, once untouchable, now carried a shadow. I didn't celebrate their embarrassment, but I didn't grieve it either. Margaret called that Saturday. How are you holding up? Ask me in 6 months. She chuckled. Eleanor would have handled it the same way. The vote of confidence instead of immediate termination, giving him a chance. She didn't believe in cruelty, I said. She believed mercy was the strongest move of all. After we hung up, I thought about that. Mercy isn't weakness. Mercy is choice. And for the first time, the choice had been mine. June 8th, 2024. 3 weeks later, my mother called. Dulce, she said quietly. Can we talk? Just us. We met at a midtown coffee shop, neutral ground. She looked older, tired beneath the careful makeup. Thank you for coming, she said. I don't deserve it. What do you want, Mom? To apologize. Her voice cracked. For everything. Are you sorry because you regret it? I asked. Or because everything changed? She flinched. Both, she admitted. I focused so much on Miranda's success. On appearances. I told myself we were protecting you from expectations you couldn't meet. But that was a lie. You let Dad call me worthless in front of family. In front of colleagues. You never defended me. I know. Tears fell. I can't undo it. But I don't want to lose you completely. I studied her. The woman who braided my hair as a child and forgot my birthday as an adult. I can't erase the last 20 years, I said slowly. But I'm willing to try building something new. Something honest. She nodded, unable to speak. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a beginning. In August, Miranda called. We met near Bethesda Fountain in Central Park. She looked different, exhausted, stripped of polish. I've been in therapy, she said. Since May. 3 times a week. That's good. It's brutal. She laughed softly. Being the golden child isn't a gift. It's another kind of prison. She stared at the water. The way they treated you, I told myself it was normal. That you were different. That staying quiet protected you. You weren't protecting me. No, she said. I was protecting myself. She finally met my eyes. That's not an excuse. It's just the truth. I see you now. I'm sorry I didn't sooner. We sat in silence. I can't go back to what we were, I said. But I don't want to stay enemies either. Maybe we start from zero. Tears filled her eyes. I'd like that. It wasn't the sisterhood I'd imagined as a child. But it was real. By November, 6 months after the board meeting, I moved into my own apartment in Brooklyn Heights. A one-bedroom in a pre-war building with a view of the bridge my grandmother once crossed to her first office in 1965. My new salary as Director of Sustainable Development at Whitford Properties was $185,000 a year, plus dividends. The position had been my idea, a division focused on green construction, responsible development, long-term environmental impact. The kind of future my grandmother would have embraced. Gerald called once a month. Polite conversations about weather and work. We both pretended the past wasn't sitting between us. It was easier that way. My mother and I had lunch every other week. Slowly, awkwardly, she began learning who I actually was. Miranda and I met for coffee. We talked honestly about pressure and loneliness. We weren't pretending anymore. In my apartment, I hung my grandmother's portrait, the same one that had watched over the boardroom for decades. Sometimes, in the evening light, it almost looked like she was smiling. You gave me the tools, Grandma. I just had to find the courage to use them. 6 months ago, I was invisible. Now I was finally myself. Looking back, I understand something I couldn't at 27. My grandmother didn't leave me 51% because I was better than Miranda. She left it to me because she trusted I wouldn't let power twist me the way it had twisted my father. Dyslexia isn't my flaw. It's part of how I see patterns, systems, connections others overlook. The traits my parents dismissed were the same traits that revealed the truth when everyone else ignored it. Gerald measured value in degrees and titles. Eleanor measured value in character. And now I measure my own. Not by my parents' approval. Not by my sister's achievements. Not by anyone else's expectations. By my own standard. If you see yourself in my story, if you've ever been the overlooked one, the underestimated one, understand this. You don't need an inheritance to prove your worth. But you do need to stop seeking validation from people who will never give it. Boundaries aren't barriers. They're choices. My family hurt me for 28 years. I didn't need to hurt them back to find peace. I just needed to stop waiting for them to see me and start seeing myself. That's the real inheritance my grandmother left me. And no one can take that away. If this story spoke to you, if it reminded you that your value isn't defined by those who failed to recognize it, share your thoughts below.
Subscribe.
Turn on notifications. And if you want more stories about ordinary people finding the courage to stand up for themselves, check the link in the description. Thank you for listening. Until next time.